We have the great pleasure of being joined today by Joe Kent, the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, who resigned back in March of 2026 in opposition to the war against Iran. So thank you for coming back on the program. It's a great pleasure. My first question though was if you were surprised by Washington's decision to re-enter the war with Iran, because I thought with the Memorandum of Understanding the US was able to pull out, but what do you see the strategy being this time around?
Unfortunately, I was disappointed. I just think that fundamentally the Israelis got us into quite the bind. The Israelis played their hand very, very well. They understood that this war would become politically unpopular at home, and then they understood that President Trump would need to negotiate. He would seek more negotiations. And so what the Israelis did very effectively was they got us on board with killing the supreme leader very early on, understanding that that would almost negate any possibility that we would have of reaching a diplomatic solution, because it would cause a rally around the flag effect, which I think is putting it very mildly. I think if you attack any country, you're going to have a rally around the flag effect. But we killed not just political leadership, we also killed the Ayatollah, who was the source of emulation for millions of Shias, mostly in Iran, but also in Iraq as well. So we galvanized the Iranian people around the flag, and so really there's limited options that we have diplomatically.
You said there's a possibility of a ground invasion. Do you see political support for this in the US? And also, if they do this, what is the likelihood of success here? Because it looks there's a lot of things that could go wrong, I guess.
A big problem that we've had from the beginning of this war, just militarily speaking, is what is success? We haven't gotten a clear answer from the administration. And if I were still in the military, that's what I'd be asking. At the end of the day, and we had these discussions in the lead up to the 12-day war and Midnight Hammer. It's like, what is our actual goal here? Because if you start military operations without clearly defining what your military strategic objectives are, what the success criteria is, and the end state, and at which time we will say that the operations are complete and they're over, then this is how you end up in these endless quagmires. And this is a lesson that I really hope that we had learned from our experiences in the war on terror, Vietnam, etc. But we're kind of back to this fundamental question. So, without clearly defining that, which the president still has not done, he oscillates back and forth between speaking kind of regime change language, but then the second someone says, "Well, isn't that regime change?" he immediately backs away and says, "No, we don't want to do regime change. We want the Iranians to, renounce their nuclear program and open the Straits of Hormuz," which basically is taking everything back to pre-28 February when the war began. The Iranians have basically said they're not going to do that. Now, the Iranians are still saying, they're not coming out and saying they're going to develop a nuclear weapon. They're just saying that they're not going to hand back over the Straits of Hormuz. So again, we just really shot ourselves in the foot by killing the Ayatollah, because I think we've taken away the ability to negotiate. And I think because we've launched 2 attacks during negotiations, that the people in Iran right now, the leadership there, I don't think they can give President Trump a diplomatic win. So now we're back to, okay, we're going to do a ground incursion. What would that ground incursion look like? And this is where I get a little bit worried, because I think what the Pentagon has had to do is they've had to say, okay, we've done an air campaign for quite some time now, Mr. President. We're kind of like running out of things to bomb that are going to be effective. And so if you want to force open the Straits of Hormuz, here's how we could do it militarily. Hopefully they're caveating that with saying, like, in the short run. Because I think, could we seize some of the islands? We could. The U.S. military is very powerful, but could we hold them in the long term? Like, if you go back to our success rate at actually holding ground effectively, I just think back to our recent wars, to the east and west of Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan. We had a hard time holding ground, and that was from insurgents that were armed with, IEDs, RPGs, mortars, etc. They weren't armed with sophisticated ballistic missiles and drones. So I think our ability to actually have real success on the ground is very limited. I think we could come into a situation where the Iranians either let us come in, they let us land, they let us hoist the flag and say we had some great victory, and then they just hammer us and isolate our air power from our ground forces with ballistics and drones, creating basically a hostage-like situation. Or right as we come in, they start vectoring their fire. We saw from the attack in Jordan that they just did with the ballistics this past weekend that tragically cost us, 3 American soldiers. We've seen that they can actually vector in pretty effectively and accurately with very powerful missile systems, from a good distance away. I mean, Jordan is a ways away from Iran. So that should make us take pause about having our naval forces anywhere near Iranian shores right now. But we would have to put our naval forces near Iranian shores to actually put boots on the ground.
On this escalation, though, how are you reading it? Because it appears that the war is having, well, some less intensity than it did in the two first rounds. But on the other hand, it appears that more actors are being pulled in, especially Yemen, and also what they're prepared to target is also escalating, it seems. I mean, the energy facilities, desalination plants. I don't know, the future of Kuwait suddenly starts to look possibly problematic. Where do you see this escalation actually going? Because I think this could be a problem. The illusion or delusion of having escalation control, as you suggested, the ability to, for example, go back to the old status quo of simply having the Strait of Hormuz open. This is not available. So, what is it that could go wrong here?
And there's so much that could go wrong. I think the Iranians for a while were observing a pretty deliberate escalation ladder. But as we escalated and we started hitting civilian infrastructure, I think the Iranians took the gloves off to a certain extent. And I think they're now using this period of it's not just tit for tat with the Iranians. I see them executing a pretty deliberate strategy where, like you said, they're targeting Kuwait. They're trying to push our bases basically out of the region, which I think we should just accept that because our bases prove to be a strategic liability and not an asset. But the longer we try and hold on to them, we're presenting more targets for the Iranians to hit. But I think in the short to medium range, the Iranians are saying, okay, if we're going to expend our ballistics and our drones, let's try and just hammer these bases. The Iranians basically in the last 24 hours have come out and said to the Gulf states, hey, if your hotels or other areas are housing American troops, they're going to be fair game as well. So they're clearly their goal, it's not just, to kill Americans. That's definitely a byproduct, but their goal is to push American troops out of all these different Gulf bases that are along the border with Iran, providing them more strategic depths to secure their own borders.
大家好，我是主播周玉琴。很多的朋友告诉我们，选择原版的太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它添加有羽衣甘蓝，健康再加分。而有睡眠困扰的朋友们，赶快选择蓝色包装这一款晚安加强版，绝对是更有感。每日克菲尔，时刻美好 ，Good Feel Good， 请上快点购为健康下单，而且要记得输入推荐代码，有额外的折扣优惠。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌基础版、晚安加强版，新包装改版，内容不变，抽取更方便。要吃就吃最好的。